Shut up. I feel attacked.
I was 12 years old.
Oh, see, they're fine.
I remember driving home from the first Star Wars movie and
What, you were driving?
feeling just so empowered. It was like it was a night, you know, the lights were all, you know, and I just felt like I was like I had the Force was with me. I could drive like a maniac and not hit anything. And it dawned on me, why do I feel like this? You know, I'm not a Jedi Knight, and I could easily run into an old lady, you know, old lady at 3 o'clock, you know. 10, 9, 8, 2 3/4. So, I was thinking of Claudio Monteverdi, but he's actually pretty early for Leibniz. I don't know. I imagine Leibniz got to hear some Verdi. I don't think I would be able to find Rossi. Videos, I guess, no. It looks like the video that I was thinking of is gone. They took it off. I don't know why. But in any case, you can listen to his music elsewhere, but not in the Palace of Versailles, I guess. Which was the really neat thing, because that's where it had been originally performed. How? So today, we're looking at Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. One of the quiz questions I used years ago was, what is Leibniz's first name? And considering the assignment prior to the class was to have read Leibniz's work in the text, and no one ever got it. Guessed all kinds of things, but no one opened the book and looked and saw what his first name was. It was just one of those revealing moments, you know, that nobody reads the assignment, which is kind of, or figures out why I'm wearing the colors I am. You know, that's kind of fun too. I try to dress appropriately for whatever, you know, but yesterday I was doing poverty, you know, basically how love and money, you know, Richard Rorty, and I just thought, you know, the concern really was, do you have to take care of the poor, or can you just say screw them, right? And
interesting, huh?
And so I wore an Irish tie.
Rough. Ouch. Ooh. Sorry. But are you really?
Am I Irish?
No, are you sorry?
Whenever I apologize for something and I say sorry,
you don't.
I'm not.
I was just checking.
I'm just trying to cover my.
You should start saying sorry, not sorry, so that it's clear.
No, I'm just trying to cover my tracks.
Right.
Not, you know, remember I'm recording this.
I
If
know.
it's working, you know, if it's working. It looks like it's working. So that could, you know. I'm pretty well covered because no one watches those either.
I watch them.
Well,
sorry. Sure you are.
So, I should actually always start by going to way, I've discovered for some reason that at the end of class, the last date I have on the syllabus is May 3rd.
Interesting.
And it is
That is
true.
cool.
It is true that we will not have class on May 3rd.
No, we
But
won't.
I'm not sure
That
May
is a
3rd
true
is a Thursday.
statement.
And what this
Is that May 3rd, 2019 or 2020?
Or
well,
2018,
Yeah.
we definitely didn't have class.
Because we didn't have class on the day, yes.
yeah, what it tells me is I never actually corrected the final dates once I got them. And for some reason I thought that I had. So, by the way, it was hilarious to me. I sent these syllabi in, and they
And they read
checked
them?
them.
Yeah.
They checked them to make sure that I included what they really thought.
Or did they really check them?
They probably
You know,
don't, honestly.
the accreditation committee, which is going to check them in October, are going to be happy. You got everything in there. And they wrote me back. Even there are 3 words wrong in, the student.
How much are they paying them? I can do
And
that job
I
myself.
thought, so I
About the Title IX thing.
went through with my chair to make sure I got the right. She emailed me the exact right thing, and I corrected it, put it in there.
Obviously,
And
it's bad.
here I am, 2 weeks later, and I'm
Obviously.
looking at it, and I realize I never fixed the dates at the bottom of the syllabus. So all of my syllabi are wrong.
Nice.
And that's actually important, because that's when I'm promising I would be here. May 3rd, no, we're not going to be here.
Wait, the final time is right, though, right?
Uh,
It's just after it says May 3rd and there's no class.
Well, no, actually, no, because we go on to, I think, December 14th. So,
Okay.
so there's a whole other week that I've got to,
What?
TBD.
Alright.
right? I mean, I looked it up, and sure enough, the finals start the next week, apparently. Do you have that down somewhere?
Yeah,
When
I
they're
have
gonna
a
find-
final time for this. I don't know where I got it, though.
Well, if you got it from me, I'm sorry.
It's
Right.
different than what's on the board.
I'll have to fix it. I've got the dates now. I have them on a little note paper that I'm going to take
On
with
a
me
little note paper, that sounds very
to the
precarious.
admin building on the weekend sometime.
Uh-huh.
That's
When parking is free downtown. I don't usually go to campus when the parking
I
will
can't
cost me.
believe that faculty have to pay.
I still haven't gotten a ticket, so I'm doing all right.
I've yet to ever get a ticket. I've never paid.
When
Full disclosure.
well they got you by the various names
Damn.
for gonads if you use those.
I heard it's like a $30 fine.
It was pretty expensive.
It's hefty.
Because one time,
I'm still
one
saved so much
time-
money at this point.
It's true, yeah, you've saved a lot of money. I've spent like maybe
One
$500
time it
on
was-
like 3
it was,
semesters for parking.
Yeah.
Which is freaking
It
ridiculous.
was like the
Well, so we got
weekend,
my GI Bill stipend, so
when parking is
so-
free and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And I parked in
So
the
it was $200 or something.
the parking garage by the admin building, and I just parked. I pulled in, practically empty, pulled into a spot, walked in, and did my whatever stuff when I stopped at my computer there. Came back out, and I had a ticket. It was like Saturday, and I was like, "What the heck?"
Don't
and
you have
it turned
anything
out-
better to do on
and
a
it
Saturday?
turned out that I was parked in a compact car spot.
Oh, crap.
And I thought, well, but it's a Volkswagen Tiguan. Isn't that a compact car?
Yeah.
Apparently not. It's 4 inches too tall.
Oh, there's like a
Okay.
measurement for that?
There's
I
a
thought
height
it just-
measurement.
Time out. I drive a Honda CRV, and it's taller, and I park in compact car areas all the time.
We'll watch it then.
I
Be
guess,
careful-
because that's
be careful,
ridiculous.
because
Got by the
They gave me a ticket. They did not
For
give me a
any car, that's
reprieve when I
BS.
said, how do I know it's a compact spot? Actually,
Did you argue
In-
it? I would have argued it.
yes, but
Did you win?
in yellow print, now it's dark in there. You pull in. Didn't notice, and it was kind of faded too. But it says compact car. Now they fixed it. Now they've got signs. that
Did you
tell
have to
it's a
pay it?
I did. I
That's
did.
bullshit.
And It was pretty darn
That's
expensive.
bullshit.
Way more than it would have.
Fuck you,
Really?
Ray.
But the thing was, it wasn't like I should have paid to park in the wrong spot, because you would have gotten the ticket. Obviously, I got the ticket anyway.
That's ridiculous. You should argue it again.
Yeah,
I'd argue that.
Wouldn't have
Or-
paid it.
appeal it all the
When I
way.
printed out the syllabus, it has all the right dates.
You know what, I maybe
Magic.
when I used,
Some Harry Potter
and
stuff
fixed
right
it for the stuff that they wanted, I screwed it up by putting the,
That's possible. I have the final time if anybody wants it.
Be okay with
there.
that.
I'll
The real
probably need
final
it. I'll
time?
probably need it sometime between now and December.
But not right this
December
minute.
Yeah.
15th.
We'll figure it out. It's all good.
thanks. I don't know how I did that. I mean, I thought I was copying over the one that I actually had posted, so I'll have to fix it. It's one of those things. I will probably keep messing it up by, this time I'll fix the date and forget the other thing. Before you know it, I'll be in trouble for that. As long as I don't get another parking ticket. So,
That's outrageous.
Leibniz. By the way, you might see Leibniz spelled different ways. Sometimes you'll see TZ and there's other spelling, so it's not everyone all agrees it's IZ. And by the way, they don't say von. He always, throughout his life, wanted to be called von, which was a sign of nobility, but he never
it's
earned
not
it.
a title.
Yeah, he's had no title, so it's not von Leibniz. It's Leibniz.
It's never gone.
So it's just lots of things I could say about him. It's really fascinating. One of the neatest things is, and this is just my hypothesis, that Albert Einstein, who's pretty famous, old one mug, right? Einstein. Stein actually means a rock, so old one stone, I suppose. In any case, he always said that he had a secret source for a lot of his ideas. And, there's all sorts of people trying to figure out, was it his wife, because she was a mathematician, his first wife, because she was a mathematician and stuff. My suspicion was that it was Leibniz. Because Leibniz is actually a much earlier relativist, in the same sense of physics as Einstein was. In fact, remember he's contemporaries with a lot of folks. Hobbes was still alive when Leibniz, as a young man, visited England. And he wrote a letter to Hobbes asking if he could stop and visit him. Unfortunately, Hobbes never checked his email and never replied to Leibniz. It was like still sitting on his desk, and Hobbes was out playing tennis, so Leibniz never got to visit him. But of course, Sir Isaac Newton is a contemporary, and Sir Isaac Newton admitted him to the Royal Society, and the grounds for that was his calculating machine, which is kind of cool. Calculator. That's a good picture of.
That's cool.
Way
Yeah.
better than Galileo.
Now, remember, Pascal famously invented
Oh, no,
a
Pascal.
calculating
Yeah.
machine that did adding and subtracting. And remember, it could also do multiplication and division by doing multiple versions of the adding and subtracting. But this could do calculus,
That's
which
crazy.
is like absolutely crazy. On the flip side, on the flip side of this, though, both machines that he tried to get to London to show the Royal Society how it worked never ended up working, because en route somebody would always steal the gold parts. Because at the time you couldn't smith other metals the way that the parts had to be, so the parts were always made out of gold, and as a result, someone always stole the working mechanism, so he never actually got a working copy there. And as far as I know, the first working copy of the basic principle of this was only manufactured many years later by a small company called International Business Machines that made them. And you've heard of IBM?
Yes.
Yes. So it was a good machine. They got them started. So that's kind of impressive that he did that. And that's the machine that got him into the Royal Society. But that wasn't going to last because he and Sir Isaac Newton, in multiple writings of letters back and forth, because Leibniz, really, all of his works were through letters primarily. He didn't officially publish books. They were published eventually, and they're still publishing and translating some of his works, which are difficult, by the way, because he was a polyglot. He spoke polyglot. Polyglot. Je suis un polyglot. It just means you can speak more than one or two or three. Glottis, as in your throat. Person who knows and is able to use several languages. Polyglot? Never heard of it.
Okay.
Polymath. I'm not a polymath. Polymath is a person who not only can do this, but knows lots of stuff and is also really good at math on his feet. Which, I've seen people that can do that. And that's kind of weird, where they just take an odd number and tell you the answer faster than your computer when they're just like standing in front of the microphone. Yeah. Well, in any case, he would, as I think he was like 5 years old when he first started reading all of his dad's books in the library, and his dad's books were in Greek and Latin and Hebrew and whatever. He figured it all out, and all his life read all of those, and then whenever he wrote a letter and he was quoting something from one of those books, he would quote it in the language. So when you're translating his text, you're switching from one language to another line by line, even within a statement. And they're on the web, by the way, so you can take a look at a lot of that and see what his letters look like in the original.
You said he wasn't a blue blood, but he's an electorate, and that's pretty high up.
Oh, yeah, he was the Duke who became King George, was his boss.
Yeah.
And hired him for he was highly regarded intellectual, not only the Duke, he got his doctorate when he was so young. The university that was about to award it were embarrassed and held off. And so another university nearby offered him a doctorate, no questions asked, and he took that one. And then they offered him a teaching position, even though he was like really just a kid. And he said no, he wanted to go out and see the world and not just stay in an academic environment. So he ended up working for the Duke. Which Duke was it? The one that became George III, I believe, or is it George I?
Pioneer Chairman.
House of, Hanover. And you'll notice that's also when they have a falling out, him and Sir Isaac Newton, because of the letters that he's writing around, he's telling people about his calculus. And at the same time, actually about 10 years before Leibniz, Sir Isaac Newton had developed his version of fluxions, but he didn't share it with anyone. There's an odd thing that I found in a book called The Calculus Wars. read books like this, the calculus one. It was
It's a little
fascinating.
different.
It was absolutely amazing.
I would want to read this one.
Yeah, it was great. Because it's history. It talks about calculus, how they developed calculus. And this...
But who won? I mean...
Well, no one really... Well, I mean...
Well, I mean, we all win, but...
Oh, well, when you get right down to it, the conclusion of the book
Yeah.
is that both of them independently, but in touch with one another, developed calculus.
So without sharing any ideas...
Well, they teased one another. They said, I figured out how to do such and such.
Right.
Did you? And, the other guy goes, I figured it out, But they wouldn't actually say the solution.
But then they both actually did, so...
Right.
That's weird.
But the odd thing is, at the time, scientists didn't publish and say, I figured out if you mix tin with gold and just this much, you get a gild that will, stay on the ball, or whatever. No, they didn't share that. That was like all ways of making money by keeping it as a secret, right? For example, harbor masters who knew what the tide was in their own local harbor would sell the time that the ship captain should leave the harbor. It wouldn't tell them what the actual tides were so that they could figure out when they wanted to leave, but it was instead, that they would sell it as specific information that only the harbor
Trade secrets.
Yeah, they knew. It wasn't until the Metaphysical Club really got to. Not that. Well, they didn't call themselves that, or did they? I forget. But there was a group of scientists, that really made science kind of a state affair, so that the state would start funding things. Babbage was one. His name rhymes with cabbage, so it's easy to remember. And by the way, Babbage created a really room size calculator, which the Brits paid a lot of money for that to develop it over time. And from what I understand, they actually never ended up using it. So a lot of these early devices basically turned out to be show and tell devices and never really...
That's technology, man. Obsolete.
Yeah. And this one was purely mechanical, so you had to turn the knobs to make all the different things work. Right? And he built it piece by piece by piece by piece. Kept experimenting and trying to do that. So Babbage, kind of interesting. Charles Babbage. I guess I gotta put Charles in there. Charles Babbage. But the book is called the Philosophical Breakfast Club. There were four. These four. That's Babbage there. Should probably say 4 remarkable friends who transformed science. So that's pretty cool. But one of them figured out the tides. So that's the history. That's much later, actually, than Leibniz.
So that put a bunch of people out of business, huh?
It did. It did
Sure.
because and it's really quite an accomplishment because the British Empire had to solve that problem.
Right.
Because
I bet the Navy was spending too much.
Well, this book pointed out that at the time there were like 20,000 ships a year that would be sunk. Mostly because they hit rocks near the harbors, because they didn't know how deep everything would be at a certain particular time of day. But so it became really a national
they not read the tides a little bit? Like, you know, see the
They
tides come in,
didn't.
see the
They
tides
didn't
come
know
in.
it was a worldwide system. It was this study that they did, that they started by having members of the British Empire time things where, you know, and by the way, time, you figure out time, you know, that's, you know, we've grown up, you know, with, you know, we've got a clock, we know what time it is, but you know what, this is invented.
Yeah.
The whole system is invented, and you know, it's actually just a facade. It's not really right. The Earth doesn't move that way. You know, the sun doesn't, you know, none of this stuff really cooperates with like a digital clock.
Well, that's why we got
For a place, you know, my own personal meridian is totally off.
And we got daylight
compared to-
savings, I mean, all kinds of adjustments and like
Right,
revisions and
Yeah.
Daylight get away with that. I think some people are getting rid of
Joke
There-
about it. They only fix like 2 weeks of the year.
There was like a calendar in the 17-somethings
French Revolutionary time
that
was
skipped
pretty cool.
from April 2nd to April 12th. There were like no days in between because they were trying to fix the calendar at that point. You know, it was like, what happened to all of the days?
So did it go from like a Monday to like a Wednesday if it skipped 10 days? Or would it just
I think it stayed the
Monday
same
and then
day of the
it was
week,
Tuesday, but it was the 12th?
but it just all these days
Oh,
just
man.
disappeared.
Yeah,
out
I
of the
stole a whole
calendar.
weekend. That's
You know,
it.
that's what I was thinking. I was like,
Do I get paid for those days?
Yeah,
How's that work?
Show up, you know.
or does the number of the day just change and the next day is the same?
but yeah.
But so reading stuff like these kinds of books, you know, the Calculus Wars, you learn that scientists kept their secrets, but nonetheless they were upset when someone else looked like they stole their secret, you know, because Sir Isaac Newton was
How can you steal
absolutely
a secret
convinced
if
that
it's a
Leibniz
secret?
stole his ideas. But when you go through the letters, you can see.
Oh my god.
Well, I mean, if you're like a scientist, they assume that you're probably like, you know, if you went and stole. Like,
What's oh my
some-
god though? What did you just?
I just said, oh my god, because I think it's ridiculous that they're like, oh, he stole my secret, but
They
it's
did-
a secret.
they did.
So it's like,
It would be like.
it's
if-
just really petty.
well, yeah, but I mean, it'd be like if somebody stole somebody else's like song.
And
or-
plus he was
Oh
the
my
head
god, he
of.
stole my juice box. Like, what are we in preschool?
He was the head of the Royal Society and
Oh.
president. So he kicked Leibniz out of it.
Well, that changes everything,
You know,
doesn't
by
it?
signing it as president, not as Sir Isaac Newton, because
Oh my
you know it was, you know, he,
This is so petty.
yeah. By the way, still today,
It's really
if you go to England and you want to talk about the greatest, you know, mathematician, scientist, you know, it's Sir Isaac Newton. Be very careful. You
So
do
that's-
not mention Leibniz in England, because Leibniz is you know, name verboten, you know, kind of,
Interesting.
you know, don't mention. But if you're in France and over,
It's like
You're good.
it's Leibniz, you know, so it's a cultural thing. Be aware, you know, hail Leibniz while you're in Europe. But in England, you know, especially now that Brexit, you know, wow, what's going to happen?
Oh god.
Yeah,
Let's not
get.
talk about that.
Yeah, be ready. And by the way, I think Ireland is on the same sheet of music with Europe on this. So you know and I'm not sure that many Irish are involved. You know.
mostly.
Anything against England.
Any way they can.
In fact, Bishop Berkeley. I'll mention Berkeley because notice if we. What happened? Did I totally? Oh, I didn't put it there again. Sorry. Just so you see, because we're doing Leibniz today here, but notice Berkeley is next class. So I'll throw in a little tidbit here. Bishop Berkeley is corresponding with Leibniz and agrees with Leibniz. Berkeley also is a friend of Jonathan Swift. You're probably all familiar with him thanks to Gulliver's Travels, that kind of text. They were friends, they were buds, schoolmates, and it was Jonathan Swift who got the same Nobel that was his sponsor for publishing, was also then Berkeley's sponsor when he published. And Berkeley was very good at math as well, and some of his ideas that he sent to Leibniz concerning the development of the calculus, because they're all writing to one another, actually, Leibniz adapted and used them for his version of calculus. So Berkeley is involved in that. And there's some other things that I think is really impressive with Berkeley, because other ideas that Leibniz had was the monad. So monad is just kind of another name for atom.
Yeah, I was wondering what the difference was. I couldn't really figure out that there was much difference between a monad and an atom.
They're just names for the smallest possible particle.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
now the trouble with atom is, remember, I think we mentioned, when they realized you can split it still further, we shouldn't have continued to call that particular size thing an atom. Yeah. Monad you could get away with, because we never called the atom a monad. Right. But that was Leibniz's name for it, and it just means a one, the ones. And these are the smallest particles, which by definition for Leibniz are uncuttable. And in order for them to be uncuttable, they have to be, they have no parts. And that is kind of difficult to conceive of, right? How can they have no parts? Notice there's a tradition associated with the smallest thing having no parts. The soul, thanks to Plato, through Socrates through Plato, has no parts, and that's why it's eternal. Because to destroy something, you have to pull the parts apart. To put something together, you have to put the parts together, right? So the soul, which has no parts, is abstract, invisible, has no parts, can't be put together or destroyed. So for Plato, it's eternal. Christians never quite explain how, for some reason, something that has no parts can be put together and in the body and sold at a particular point in the fetus's development. When the feet start going, how they do, feet, how the baby goes, kaya, how they do. No. So.
Oh my.
Usually around 3 months, so they say. It's kind of important for the issue of abortion, because as far as the Catholic Church was concerned, up to the ensoulment of the fetus, you could get rid of the thing if you wanted. You weren't killing a soul, because it hadn't been ensouled yet. So up to 3 months, if you had some finagling way of flushing to join out, you could. That was okay. It was legal. Because it wasn't a soul yet. The soul is what you have to worry about. So.
Not the life, just the soul.
Oh yeah, the body. Well, beat the crap out of that. It's the soul that's important. Whip it. How you do. Starve it fast. Torture it as much as you can. I remember one movie as a kid. There was a young girl who was a saint, and it was all about this particular saint. And at one point she was going to be whipped with this long, ugly-looking thorn branch for doing something, but they reprieved her at the last minute, and she took the thorn branch and curled it up into her chest, and bleeding, from, showing that she thought her body should suffer,
That's weird.
Yeah.
And in the movie, of course, everyone's like, oh man, she clearly is a saint. Whoa,
If you beat the shit out of yourself, you must be a saint.
Damn, you're self-destructive.
Yeah, and that was considered honorable, and clearly you were divinely inspired and everything
No,
else.
you're inspired. Okay, that's what they call it these days.
Now we're part of the Nike generation. Just do it, that kind of,
Like,
and no, you don't hurt yourself. That's unless it's of course for extreme sports.
Aristotle, like Dark Ages, though.
We don't associate Aristotle with the Dark Ages, but
Yeah, but that's what I said. Wasn't that kind of like before Aquinas?
Aquinas is a scholastic 1245.
But I mean, when all the saints were doing stuff like that, like, wasn't that before the church rediscovered?
Saint Francis was famous for getting the signs of the cross. Yeah. Teresa, not Mother Teresa, but Teresa of Avila. And even contemporary monks that hang around Alaska, like Thomas Merton.
What's that?
Thomas Merton.
I have no idea who that is. I don't keep up a lot on the Catholics. I mean, except when it's like national news.
Well, Thomas Merton lived in Alaska for a while.
This guy's a monk.
Yeah, he looks like a monk.
Well, there he does, but
Wrote a lot.
Where they just look like
Looks
some
like the
ordinary.
Unabomber.
Mystical.
Oh my god. I quit. I'm done. I can't.
Doesn't look like Ted Kaczynski.
No. Said that look on his face, though.
Doesn't it mention Alaska anywhere?
Control F.
We're not.
Yeah, control F, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Did it somewhere?
So what did this guy do?
He was a monk, don't you know?
Monk?
Well, yeah, but why are we talking about it?
I brought him up as an example of a contemplative that.
Okay.
He's relatively
Just
contemporary.
just contemporary.
In fact, they've had and the reason I mention is if you're following the news, like the Catholic news, they've had lectures here talking about him. And
Really?
a lot of people love this guy. They read his stuff and they're absolutely impressed. But it's otherworldly. The focus is don't enjoy here and now. The divine, abstract soul is what's important. And if anything, you could apply that to our mindset, so that if you're trying to be happy and what you think is being happy is having golf courses, I've got 9 golf courses, but only 2 of them have swimming pools. I'm so sorry for you. Sorry, I screwed that joke up. I have 9 golf clubs, and only 2 of them have swimming pools. It leads you
Still.
oh, forget it.
No,
I messed that one up.
but all right.
But so, back to the monad. The monad are the simplest thing. They're ones. And because of that, they have no parts. They don't actually have physical being. They're spiritual.
So this is almost how he
They
gets
are
to ones and
spirits.
zeros.
Well, here's my take on this. And Berkeley is in on this, I believe. Although, again, just like with, the graduate record exam, if you take the test and, Descartes is he a mind-body dualist, interactionist? Yes, that's correct. Even if I think, I don't think so. Berkeley is officially an idealist, which means that he doesn't believe there's stuff, and people think he's absolutely wacko. Really weird. In fact, that even comes across that way in TV shows. They make him out to be wacko. So, for example, what's that philosophy book? It's written by a Swedish guy. It's all about the young girl experiencing philosophy through the letters that her father writes to her, etc. Quick, help me with the name.
I got nothing.
I'm out.
Nothing.
Okay.
Sorry, man.
None of you read it in high school.
That one guy.
No.
Not the school I went to.
Yeah.
They couldn't keep their accreditation from one
Yeah,
year to
I
the
mean,
next.
should I call and like
Sophie.
complain? Get my money back? I got to college, I didn't know this thing.
I went. That's a W. What? That's not it. Oh, these are students making up their own movie of it.
It isn't the major behind this, is it?
Sorry. See, some students throughout the world read this book.
Some students. Just not all. Just not the ones in Alaska, I guess.
But I wanted the actual Swedish TV show.
It's after 4. And the next train
That's the same thing for kids. Sorry.
But we should have to save that for another day, my dear Lily. What did you say?
I don't know what happened to it.
Third from merely electronic impulses.
40 minutes.
I'm just striking out big time.
That's okay.
This is totally not the one. So I'll just tell you, it's a pretty neat scene where in so Sophie's World is a book about a young Swedish girl whose father is away. He's a colonel in the UN, and he's in Africa or someplace. And so, since he's not home to help his teenage daughter as she's going through this kind of traumatic period in her life, he writes letters to her. And it has a surprise ending, and I won't tell you about it because it would ruin it for you if you ever read it. But it's written for really teenagers, and it introduces kind of a history of philosophy, Sophie's World. I can show you the book. That's pretty cool. Easy. Sophie's World. It's very popular, actually.
Is it Socrates? Yep.
Oh, man.
So it's been out. It's been out. I think he's dead now, but it's been out for years. And so it's like a great introduction to philosophy for teenagers. It's kind of interesting. But in the movie version, which is like a TV version that the Swedes made, but you can see subtitles if you get the right YouTube link or however. It's really eerie the way they set it up with Barclay, where she's rowed her little boat, across to this cabin that's kind of nestled in the woods, and she goes into this cabin and she's calling for people and there's nobody there. But as she's walking into the cabin, she sees herself across the room, and as she walks over, she's shocked. She walks over and she realizes it's her reflection in a mirror, in the room. But then as she's looking at it, she sees this guy dressed in, the 1600s garb come walking up behind her. And she's like, and there's Bishop Barclay. And so they have a conversation about the nature of spirit and everything. So it's kind of neatly done. It makes him really weird and eerie. But so traditionally, his view of the universe is framed by a phrase. Esse is percipi. To be is to be perceived. Esse means to be, and then in English is, and then Latin percipi, to be perceived, to perceive, right? So existence is the perception of it. And by the way, you end up with a wonderful quiz question. If a tree, anybody else want to finish it?
No.
Falls in the forest.
Yeah.
Nobody's there to hear it. Does it make a sound?
No.
You've got to email it to me.
It's too late, man.
It's too late.
So if a tree falls in the forest, there's nobody there to hear it. Does it make a sound? And when I think of that question, Barclay's answer is actually very famous. Or at least the limerick is. And the limerick goes, there was a young man who said, and I'm on page 620, that's not what he said. There was a young man who said, God must think it exceedingly odd if he finds that this tree continues to be when there's no one about in the quad. Reply, in a deep voice, dear sir, your astonishment's odd. I am always about in the quad, and that's why the tree continues to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God. That's pretty cool. So, the question here is, if existence is perception and no one's perceiving it, is it there? And for Barclay, the answer is, well, yes, because God perceives everything.
Meta-perceiver. Right?
So he's a meta-perceiver. Excellent way to put it. Yeah, never heard that before. You should write a book. You're good.
Someday.
But so you get the idea. God perceives things too, and it's the perception of God that actually enables the universe to exist as we perceive it. But here's the thing. The fight is over whether the world is made out of matter or spirit, right? So spirit or matter. And remember Locke, and I didn't actually focus on this at all, but Locke is a materialist. He's the one that really introduces the idea that the reason the universe persists is because it's matter, unchanging little bits of atoms and so on. And that time is perfectly in tune with Sir Isaac Newton, who's giving us the idea, along with Descartes, that the universe is a physical machine, like, in the movie Mind Walk, remember the the whole universe is like this physical machine. God made the clock, and it's a perfect clock, and everything is just running perfectly fine ever since. And if you believe that, you don't believe God has to keep constantly in touch with everything and make sure it's still running fine. In fact, remember, it's an insult to think that God couldn't be such a perfect machinist to make a perfect universe, that he would constantly have to reset. Oh, it's late again. He doesn't have to do that. The thing is, that also means that God doesn't have to really be there. He could have created the universe and he's went to Bermuda. Now we don't even need him around, right? Right? And so, of course, if you're praying to God, please keep this person whole and safe, I loved it today reading the paper and talking about
the storm, right?
The storm,
yeah.
And the one mayor, I think it was, how we've had all this rain and then today the sun came out and everything's going to be better. Thank God.
Right.
He's thanking God for bringing the sun out after all these days of rain, and I'm thinking, what did God, didn't He bring all the rain in the first place?
Yeah,
But He finally stepped in, and fixed things, by bringing the sun out. So we still think that way. You see it in these kinds of expressions and so on. But here's my argument. Einstein believes that there's mass and energy. And guess what? The mass is actually energy in an arrangement, right? That's where I think both Leibniz and Berkeley are going. And so when they're talking about everything being spirit, what they're really arguing is it can't be unchanging matter because we can't interact with that because our subjective self is a soul, which is energy. And you can't figure out how energy could interact with matter. It's the same problem that Descartes has with an abstract soul, mind, interacting with the physical body. There's no common characteristic that enables the hand to pull the clutch and do things with the stick shift and everything in the homunculus, right? That's driving this machine, right? And you can see Locke is following on Hobbes, who's just completely physical. There is no abstract mind. Everything is gears and interactions between Galilean motions, right? Well, Berkeley takes the side of energy, takes the side of spirit. So I would say that what's happening is we're going through a vocabulary shift where it's going from matter and spirit to mass and energy. And so in a sense, we still, in physics, have both concepts. We don't really talk about spirit anymore, we talk about energy. But guess what? The energy side has won. Because there is no actual, you get down to the atoms and then you break them down still further. Now it's no longer matter, but guess what? It's energy in an arrangement.